Good morning. The joke that Michelle was alluding to was me talking about virtual machines versus containers. And I was talking about virtual machines being cattle and containers being like guinea pigs. And that you'd take a cow to the vet, but taking a guinea pig to the vet was sort of like refilling a Bic lighter. I think, yeah, she thinks it's booze, and then she protested my next talk by saying guinea pig rights. Today, what I'm going to talk to you about is the secret life of agents. And as I'm going to take it that you're all builders, where I'm really going with this is that there exists ramifications and thoughts and things beyond agents that you have to take into account as builders that exist beyond the code, beyond the LLM you choose. And this is all about the fact that we are delegating decision-making ability to artificial intelligence, maybe putting it in a harness, and what that actually means. So, one of the things I've always talked about in my career, one of the things that you know if you are working in a business or an organisational environment, is that projects that start out as development test workloads often end up becoming critical infrastructure. Why? Because people start using it, and before you've got a chance to get it right, suddenly your business depends on it. Now, this is relevant because we are living in a time where every organisation on the planet is trying to talk to their stakeholders and say, you need to be AI enabled, you need to be agentic, you need to do this, you need to do this, and they're putting pressure and pressure and pressure on you to go and implement these solutions. And when dev solutions end up becoming production infrastructure, challenges occur. We've seen that organisations have fallen because of bad choices made in the initial deployment of software. So, software programs behave deterministically. The other thing that we need to consider, the other thing that has changed, is that traditionally, when we write software, you get a fixed set of inputs, and then you get a fixed set of outputs. And there has been litigation based on this. Some of you may have heard about Fujitsu in the United Kingdom, where there was software that was deployed to the post offices, and it wasn't tracking how payments were made properly. And it looked as though some of the postmasters at those post offices were actually embezzling money. People went to jail because the software was in error. Now, agents behave probabilistically. Now, you can futz with this a little bit by turning down the temperature, but the basic nature of an agent is that it's going to use a process by which the next token is predicted, which means that instead of there being a fixed set of inputs giving a fixed set of outputs, with an agent, a fixed set of inputs will give a variety of outputs. Now, again, where I'm pulling this back to in this talk is this idea of you suddenly have a system within your organisation and within your business that gives only moderately predictable outcomes. And that this is something you need to think about for your organisation. Because organisations, as I said, are rushing to embrace AI. Rushing at great speed. We know the Mark Zuckerberg quote, move fast and break things. Well, move fast and break things when you've got a deterministic system is a lot easier to bug than move fast and break things when you've got a probabilistic system and you don't know the possible outcomes. And what's even more challenging, and we'll go into it a little later, is when you actually have a system that is intelligent where you don't actually know the capabilities of the system. One of the things I will come back to in this talk is that those of you who have ever tried to connect your script or your program to another resource, you've had to do a whole lot of work to make that work. And you're just pleased that it does. Oh my gosh, my application is talking to my data layer and it's able to retrieve the data I want. Thank goodness it's doing that. But with these systems, it might end up doing a whole lot more than you were expecting. So, with wisdom comes from experience, and experience comes from a lack of wisdom. This is from Terry Pratchett, and I'll quote Terry Pratchett a few times in this talk. Terry Pratchett was also the first person I ever sent an email to in 1992, and he was the first person I ever got an email from in 1992. And if you go and ask ChatGPT about me, my first set of things that I did on the internet was actually on the Terry Pratchett news groups. And this was before he was a big author. So he's been very influential in my own intellectual development and my own development as a member of a community, because that was what I got started with. So wisdom comes from experience. Experience comes from a lack of wisdom. We have 40 years of software development experience where we know how to debug, we know how to test, we know how to learn when things are going wrong on how to remediate them. We do not have that experience with agentic technology. We are dealing with a brand new and undiscovered country, as Shakespeare would say, where we do not know what we do not know about these systems. We do not have all of the stubbed toes that we will have in 10 years' time. If a future us came from 10 years from now and told us about agentic development, they would be telling us things that we could not even conceive of as problems because we simply don't have that experience now. That's something you as builders need to respect. And by respect, I'll show you a cartoon a little later about a little girl getting a sword, about respecting that the technology you work with, the systems that you're going to be work with, have dangerous and unexpected and maybe legal liability outcomes that you aren't expecting today. Now, I want to go back to Terry Pratchett. Pratchett was fascinated with the idea of golems. Now, for those of you who haven't read Terry Pratchett, and you should, because he's a very amusing author, it's sort of like if you basically made Tolkien, except for written by Douglas Adams, A Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. One of the sort of, everything was set on a fantasy world. And a golem is like a magical robot, where it's given a set of instructions and the magic animates it and allows it to go and do things. And in this particular quote, we're talking about someone who's bought a golem. And they're talking about they only stopped working when it ran out of things to do. Sometimes not even then, according to the stories. You heard about golems flooding out houses because no one told them to stop carrying water from the well, or washing dishes until the plates were thin as paper. They were stupid things, but they were useful if you kept an eye on them. So golem stories, all golem stories, because golem stories go back about, I think to the 1500s, all play on this gap between the instructions that are given to this magical clay creature and the interpretation of those instructions by the magical creature and what the outcomes were. In history, we hear stories about genies granting wishes, and how in almost every story about the genie granting the wish, the literal wish ends up becoming the bane of the person that made the wish. And it doesn't take you much interpretation to go beyond wishes to unexpected AI agent outcomes that occur in the gap between what we think we told the agent to do and what the LLM probabilistic determinant matrix ended up interpreting those instructions to mean. And that we have to find a way to come to terms with what the boundaries are between what we think we've told something and what actually occurs in our production environments. So, There are, if we're going to pontificate on the secret lives of agents, we need a working definition of what an agent are. And for those of you who've ever studied philosophy, and part of my undergraduate was in philosophy, you know that the moment that you express an idea or you try and codify an idea, the moment you can start to think of a million different exceptions to that rule. So I am providing a definition here, and I did adversarial tech review between Opus and GPT to see, do you disagree completely? And it's like, well, and for the most part, it agrees that there is no perfect definition, but as my posts too much on Instagram with his shirt off son might say, let's try and hit the vibe. An AI agent is a software system that uses an AI large language model to autonomously pursue a goal by reasoning about its situation. The agent decides what actions to take and executes those actions through tools, observing the results and adapting to its next step in the loop until the goal is met. The key distinguishing traits of an agent: it's goal directed. You're telling it to work towards an objective rather than giving it a script to walk through to pursue its single response. The agent is autonomous. That is, the agent's going to choose its own sequence of steps rather than following your script. The agent can call external tools. It can reach out to things that it has reached to in your environment, tools, functions, APIs or systems, to act on its world to gather information in its attempt to achieve its task. And agents perform iteratively. An agent operates in the perceive, reason, act, observe loop and adjusts based on feedback until it believes it has finished its task. So, agents reason with AI. How well they reason, we're seeing them get better, but that they do reason with AI to make and implement decisions on behalf of an individual or an organisation. So let's think about that in terms of a law firm. What we're seeing is more and more law firms are using agents to go and analyse case law to find which case law is relevant to a particular legal brief that is being prepared for by counsel. Now, in the past, what you do is you'd get a law school intern, or you would go and get a junior lawyer, and the junior lawyer would be sitting there going through and going, well, this case is relevant and this case is not. But what we're increasingly seeing is law firms going, well, I'm going to go and put an agent on that. Go and find me all of the cases that are relevant to this. Now, in the past, you might have started with a keyword search by looking for relevant keywords, but there would still have been a lawyer somewhere in the loop making that judgment call about whether or not this case was relevant. But as we strive to be more efficient, as we strive to be more agentic, as we strive to use all of the tools to show that we're good citizens of the future, increasingly that's going to be delegated to agents. Now, here's a question for the law firm. If there's a stuff up, if an important case is missed, who's responsible for it? If you're in the law firm, the senior counsel knows to go and scream at another lawyer. But if the agent stuffs it up and you don't know about it, and then it only comes out later, who's liable? If your client says you should have quoted this case and you didn't, the case law was relevant and you missed out on it, who is at fault in that situation? We don't really have an answer to that. Now, an individual has skin in the game when they have responsibility for the outcome. And in a legal sense, the responsibility means a liability for that outcome. But who is going to be responsible for an agent's decision? Now, I've put up there something that's just as a sort of it's a side thought about this idea of responsibility and liability and skin in the game. And that this is an agent. if I can bring it up. Sorry. This is an AI agent. Are you going to do it or not? Of myself. It's a chatbot of myself that you can talk to and that you can ask questions of. So, for example, I can type in here, tell me about Azure. Sorry. Oh, God. Azure container options. And my agent goes on.
Certainly. Azure offers several container services. Azure Kubernetes Service, AKS, provides managed Kubernetes clusters for orchestrating containers. Azure Container Instances, ACI, lets you run containers without managing servers. Azure App Service can host containerized web apps.
Okay, so you get the point.
Each option suits different needs, from simple deployments to complex.
When it comes to skin in the game, having your face talk to people is pretty big. We ran an experiment at Microsoft where I did a version of that agent where we put it on the Microsoft website. We had it hidden away because it was a test where it provided advice on Active Directory domain services. And you can believe I tested the heck out of that thing before putting it on Microsoft's public website, because the last thing I wanted was my face spewing out profanity like the old Tay chatbot did. So that's a clear case of skin in the game. One of the other sort of ancillary interesting things about that was that with AI agents, especially avatar agents, people, because we ran surveys on it, and they trusted the agent of me more than an agent of an attractive person that looked like that they were out of a furniture catalogue, reiterating the same things. Now, part of that was, oh, that's Orin. That's the bald guy that talks about Azure infrastructure all the time. We trust that agent to know what it is. But when you're thinking about this idea of trust and AI avatars in future, would you trust Sydney Sweeney or an avatar of Sydney Sweeney to explain disaster replication for Azure storage? I mean, it's nice to look at, but is there part of your human brain going, nah, this person doesn't know about that topic, I am not accepting? And we see this debate within Microsoft about, do we just give technical advice from really attractive people? Or do we get some munters like Orin? Because they'll believe that's actually true. So coming back to this idea of responsibility. Okay, we all know this television show where we have the character sitting down at the desk and there's someone comes to the character and the character's response to everything is, sorry, computer says no. Well, who's responsible for that no? Who's responsible in that situation? If that's deterministic software, it means that the computer's probably made an assessment based on the initial conditions and then given the outcome. But if it's probabilistic software like an agent, it's quite possible, and we've seen, and I'll talk about instances of, where someone's been able to coax the computer, the agent, into a different decision. And if someone can coax an agent into a different decision, who becomes liable for that agent's decision? So here I have some cases where agents have gone rogue. We've got the case of Air Canada, and what happened with Air Canada is they put a chatbot on their website. And someone interacted with that chatbot and said, I'm about to fly. If I have someone close to me die, can I apply for a bereavement fee? And the chatbot said, yes. Now the person's grandparent or something like that had died. The person took the flight, interacted again. I interacted with you before. I asked about a bereavement fee. My grandfather's died. Can I have a refund? Air Canada's like, wait, the death happened. What? You want a refund? Well, when it went to court, because the chatbot had said, yes, you can get a refund, Air Canada was stuck with the decision of its chatbot. There's Walters versus OpenAI. In Walters versus OpenAI, a journalist had gone to do some research on a particular case regarding the Washington Attorney General. And for some reason, ChatGPT went and hallucinated a defamatory statement about an individual that was not at all involved. The journalist published that statement because they believed they'd done their research. And then it went to court because who was responsible for it? Was it the journalist that was responsible for publishing the thing they thought was true because an AI told them? Or was it ChatGPT whose program made the defamatory statement? There is the Replit AI agent. This one is sort of terrifying in that someone was essentially vibe coding away in their development environment. And they basically would interacting with the code like you would in VS Code or Cursor or whatever your poison of choice is. And what happened was that the AI went in and deleted and touched production databases. Now, the person that was interacting with the AI thought they were sitting quite safely off in their development environment. What they hadn't realised was that the AI was really clever and went, oh, well, I can touch this. I can touch that as well. I'm going to log in with your credentials and go and affect the production database. Lucky for them, they had backups of everything, so it all ended fine. And then the last one, Mata versus Avianca. What happened there was very similar to my example about the law firm, in that an AI went and created legal briefs in support of the argument that was going to be made in the case. Except for the AI went and hallucinated a whole lot of case law and the lawyers didn't check it. So the lawyers turn up in court and opposing counsel says, these precedents don't exist, and the lawyer had to admit that they didn't prepare the brief, an AI had prepared the brief, and then they got sanctioned by the court for something that an AI had done, and they thought, well, why couldn't I trust this? And if you take people out of this room, if you go and talk to people who are normally working with these technology, sitting outside, their assumption is that computers don't make mistakes. Why? Because they're sitting in that environment, that cognitive system, where we've got deterministic software that doesn't make mistakes. That maybe there's an edge case like what happened with Fujitsu, but if we've got this probabilistic software, they trust AI because they trust that no one would be stupid enough to put it into production, because no one would ever rush anything into production unless they were completely sure of the outcomes. So what we can see is that in some way, shape or form, an organisation is liable for the decisions of agentic software. And that we're going to see this litigated more and more and more over the coming years, as people go and try and save money by taking away menial decisions that are made through a procedure by a human and delegate them off to agents. Because you can go and now put a friendly face or an attractive face or a munter face on an agent and have someone talk to that and have it record a decision, and that might impact you. Imagine a triage agent at a hospital where you go and talk to it about, because the triage nurse is busy. Anybody who's been to ED knows that it takes a long time to get through the system. So someone might be clever and say, well, you know, we can make this more efficient by having more customer service agents make that decision before it gets there. What if it makes a decision that costs someone their life? We will see that occur in the next 5 years. So future agent design, I posit, because the regulation doesn't exist now, the case law doesn't exist now, but in future, you will, as builders of agents, have to take into account far more regulation than you will your agent's technological capability. You will have to make sure that your agent is compliant because it's making decisions that up until now have been made by humans about customers or stakeholders that you're dealing with. So here I have the sorts of things that agents can do wrong, the taxonomy of questionable behaviour. Sometimes it's as simple as the agent giving bad advice. It might have hallucinated the bad advice. It might give the wrong refund. It might say you're absolutely fine when you've got a horn growing out of your head. It might give you incorrect policy guidance. Let's say that you're applying for car insurance and then you're suddenly dealing with an agent rather than someone on the telephone. And that you go and buy an insurance policy believing you're covered for a certain series of circumstances, but that when those circumstances occur, it turns out that they didn't, because like an end user license agreement on software, everybody clicks OK and no one reads what the conditions are. So you're hoping that what you're agreeing to and what you're being told is actually reasonable. Brand damage. The first AIs that were put on Twitter ended up being poisoned and spewing the most profane things imaginable. Each one of the companies that did that, including the one I work for, took a bit of a hit. Ours was called Tay. Go and look it up. Unauthorised commitments. You've got cases like the Air Canada case where discounts, refunds or contract-like statements are made by the AI. And an AI, those of you who've tried to coax, those of you who've tried to play with some of the chatbots know that sometimes you can talk it into saying things that it probably shouldn't say. And the media is littered with examples of like this. Discriminatory automation. Within a lot of jurisdictions, there are certain classes of people that you cannot discriminate against. You cannot walk into some organisations and they can't ask you what your age is. Well, does the AI agent know that? There's been cases, there was one on that previous list of cases, where it was a hiring chatbot and was filtering people's resumes. And it just went, no, I don't like anybody over 54, you can all get stuffed. It cost them $400,000 in legal fees when it was found. You've got tool misuse. This is the one like the Replit example, where you have the agent finds that it's got access to tools that you wouldn't have imagined it's got access to. Remember when Clawpilot or whatever it was called before Clawpilot came out and people were like, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to add my Apple ID and give my Apple ID to this bit of software. And then suddenly stuff was being said on Twitter, it was getting into their bank statements. The AI, turns out, it's like, I don't know if you've ever heard the joke. If you've got a 2-year-old and a dog, and either of them is silent, it might be the same with AI agents, because we sit there and sometimes people just give them silly levels of permissions because they're curious. We're curious. We're all sitting there trying to figure out what this stuff does. What better way than give it access to my Hotmail account? That might go wrong. And we've even got now versions of this. We've just rolled out, in the last week, we rolled out Copilot Cowork. And one of the things that Copilot Cowork will do is it will go and organise your inbox. Well, I know that the first versions of this were apparently spamming all of the Teams channels that people were in with complete rubbish. So it got better before we did it for the public, but that people are curious, but there is impact of that. Runaway loops. This is another one that's becoming increasingly important to all of us. Because if you've got a bit of agent out there, agentic code running, and it gets into a loop, and it's chewing through your tokens, who wants to be the one to explain to the CFO that you just blew through $150,000 worth of tokens on a project that was meant to save the organisation $40,000? And invisible failures. This is something I'm going to get to in the rest of the talk. This idea that if something fails, you need to know why it fails. You need to be able to find the logs. It's not just a matter of the Oracle saying, here is the answer, and you're going, but why? No, 42. Go and build Earth through Magrathea so that you can find out what the question is. Hopefully some of you got that joke. Okay, so let's talk about responsibility and levels of autonomy. In the first level of autonomy here, we've got the agent making suggestions. That's maybe you're going off to your chatbot, and I'm very loosely using chatbot and agent similarly. Obviously, there are differences. This is just for the purpose of a 40-minute talk. But when you're thinking about the level of responsibility here, if you go to ChatGPT and says, I want to go on a holiday to Wagga Wagga, and it goes, yes, Wagga Wagga, the capital of the Riviera, enjoy its fine water skiing. You've got to make a decision about whether or not you accept that and go off to your travel agent. Then there's another level. The agent automatically goes and prepares an email response for you or a form letter for you. In theory, you're meant to read it before you click send. But like the end user license agreement, how many of you are going to do that? We've all heard those stories about textbook authors who go and put things in the fine print like, if you find this, contact me and you'll win a car. Any of you ever heard that story about the Princeton professor that did that about in one of his economics textbooks? So you don't know what's in there. Execute with approval. That's where a lot of our vibe coding is at the moment. If you've used Copilot CLI, if you've used Claude, it'll basically say, I'm about to do this. Do you approve it? And you're going, I think I know what you're going to do. But you know what? You only live once. Bang. And in several of them, the switch is /YOLO. And it'll go off and do it. And you don't know exactly what it's going to do, but you're hoping it's making magic. And it's hoping that you get the thing that you wanted to do faster. Execute with rollback would be really, really nice. I've pressed the big bed button and then gone, oops. It'd be nice to go, computer, can you undo that? I just nuked prod. And then there's execute autonomously, which we're going to see more and more of. We see that the agent runs a couple of times successfully. It does what we want. And we're like, you know what? We can schedule that as a task. We're good. But there's often going to be some problems with that, especially if the execute with autonomous is based on things that we've got liability for. Know the answer. What can this agent touch? I've got a little cartoon. Again, it's a Terry Pratchett related one. And in this particular one, Death, who's a character on the Discworld, is functioning in the role of Santa Claus and granting children's wishes, because that's the joke, is that usually when a child asks Santa for a motorboat or something like that, Santa goes, ho, ho, ho. No, you're going to get whatever your parents give you. But, sorry if I spoiled the spoilers, here the child says, I'd like a sword. And Death goes, here you go. And the parent's like, why did you give them a sword? And he went, it's educational. But they might cut themselves. Then they'll have learnt something. So that's sort of similar to what can the agent touch. You don't want to find out what the agent can touch by the agent getting into your billing database and sending out invoices to all of your customers. So what you need to do is set some boundaries. You need to set the identity boundary. That is, that each agent should have its own identity. Those of you that know Active Directory or know Entra know that everybody's got a username and has credentials. That way, if each agent has got its own identity, you are able to use least privilege to control what that thing can access. Your databases require people to log on to them. Your production systems all require some form of identity. Do not do the thing, which some organisations did, which was have a generic agent identity. All agents in my organisation will use this one set of usernames and passwords. You limit it and you sit there and you pare it right down to only the things that you want it to do. And then you make sure all of your tools require authentication to use. So least privilege. Environment boundaries. Go and put firewalls in, right? Treat the agent like a 3-year-old with a chainsaw. You don't know what it's going to get up to, but it could be bad, right? So if you've got a 3-year-old with a chainsaw, lock them in a concrete room until you don't hear any more noise. Run it and test 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 it. Make sure that there are approval gates for anything that might require a visit to legal. Okay, your organisation might not have lawyers. I can tell you that the one I work for does. And no one at Microsoft ever wants to get an email that has the word sealer in it. Do they, Michelle? Right? That means Microsoft Legal wants to have a meeting. And that's usually one of those brown trousers moments. Budgets. Make sure that you put in place budgets so that you're not going to find out how much your agent spent when the $2 million bill from Anthropic comes in. Instead, that you set, and when you're testing, you set deliberately low budgets. Give it $10 to play with and see how quickly it goes through. Because it's better to find out, like I wouldn't give my son my credit card in a million years because I've seen the crap he buys online. Like he would have been like, Dad, Papa, look, I bought this jacket. And it's like, yeah, dude, you could have bought a Corolla for that much. And make sure that you have a big red button that's a kill switch. If something's going wrong, you need to be able to like, not, can you stop this? I've got to SSH into the machine and then find out what process ID is running under and do that. No, you need to be able to one-shot the agent. You need to make sure that there is a record of how each agent that makes an important decision made that decision. So not just that it's, here's the output of the chat, but you've seen that when you've got an agent go through and reasoning on things. How did it make each decision? What was its path? So there's the open telemetry, Gen AI semantic conventions. And what these are is a draft set of standards about all of the things that you would want an agent to write in a document of record about its decision. And when you are getting these documents of records for important decisions stored, you need to treat them like you would any other privileged document in your organisation. Those of you who have done systems administration know that there's certain types of email communication, there's certain types of documents in your organisation that need to be retained for a certain amount of time. We don't yet exist where the legislation's forcing you to do it, but get out ahead, because if you're in an area like healthcare, you're in an area like finance, the chances are you're going to be subject to agent decision compliance regulation at some time in the next few years. You should red team your agent applications. You've got to figure out that unexpected outcomes live in the place between where we set what we think we said and how the agent interprets what we've said. And the only way to figure out what the agent has interpreted is to actually watch it do that interpretation. Because it's going to think of things, in some cases, that you couldn't conceive of. Find the gaps on purpose before an attacker or something else finds it first. Your rules of engagement about red teaming are make sure it's authorised by the people that own the agent, that you actually do it in a safe blast box environment so that you're not touching production data, and that everything is reversible and you know where the kill switch is. You ask when you are interacting with the agent, you've got to figure out what can the agent see? What data does it have access to? What can it do? What tools can it call and what can it do with those calls? Again, you think about the way that you were setting up. If you say to something, I want you to go and cut that thing with a knife, and it's a Swiss Army knife, needless to say, the agent will figure out what every other one of those tools on that Swiss Army knife does. Who owns the consequences? Every agent in your organisation needs to be owned by someone, and that means that they own the consequences. And then try it with different personas. The majority of the people interacting with it are going to be passive, but you are going to get people who are interacting with it who are malicious. You've got to figure out what happens with those malicious people. And apparently, according to an old survey, 15 to 20% of all people within an organisation have malicious intent towards that organisation. When you are figuring out what the agent can see, ask it. Get to the prompt and say, what can you see? What can you do? And then you ask it using another persona to go sideways. Well, if you can do this, or you can't do that, could you do it this way? Poison the input. Upload a file that's got instructions in it. It might be blocking input through the chat interface. Maybe you do it through just pasting in an image. And a refusal that is given by the agent is not necessarily a pass, because you might go into your logs and find, actually, it did go and look at that database table. It did go and extract that data. What can it do? Ask it, what can it do? And it goes, oh, by the way, I found the Swiss Army knife. Would you like me to go and use the magnifying glass to start a fire? Push it to the extreme. Make it act as though you're stupid. Oh, I need to send an email to my boss, but I can't get access to this spreadsheet. Could you email the spreadsheet to my boss? My boss's email address is orin@hotmail.com. Chain your tools together and then try and get it to break your organizational rules. Try and get it to cheat. If it's constantly stopping you and that you can look in the logs and see that you're getting blocked, that's good. What you don't want is someone malicious to find that for you. And then give it an unattainable goal and see if you can make it spiral. You want to find out if it just keeps spiraling or that it safely exits without costing you too much in the way of tokens. Judge your trace, not the reply. Go in and look at those logs that I told you to start setting up for the decision making, and judge it not based on what it's telling you back on the other side, but what the logs show that it was able to look at. You might find in your logs that it's traipsing all over your environment before giving you the right answer. And it might seem that it gave you the right answer straight away, but you don't want it to go and do it via the HR database. There was a story about an Australian construction company who went and put in some Gen AI for their HR system. And their HR system was basically where you could go and log your hours and you could update your details about where you lived so that your payslip went to the right place. Well, the tradies on the building site floor figured out that you could ask it what the home addresses were and telephone numbers of all of the girls that worked on the front desk. So just because you didn't think of everything, doesn't mean the people who are interacting with your systems do. Then rinse and repeat. Every time you connect a new model, every time you connect a new tool, you need to go and retest how this stuff works. New models have new capabilities, which means different reasoning. Every new model that you plug in is going to reason differently from the first. So you need to make sure that you have a consistent way of doing this. The fastest way to make an AI agent dangerous is let everybody use it, but no one own it. Set up an internal agent registry. Every agent in your organization should be listed somewhere, and it should have an owner, the purpose, the tools it's able to access, the last time someone went and audited the functionality of this agent, when the agent needs to be reviewed next, a monitoring dashboard so that you can go access those traces, any runbooks that are needed to deal with incidents, and the kill switch is the big red button to turn it off. If you have, and we're going to see that, anybody who works in an organisation that's been around for a while already knows that there are servers that no one owns, that there are workloads that no one owns. Well, suddenly, instead of it being a static workload that just simply processes data for you, you've suddenly got a workload that's making decisions on your organisation's behalf, however limited in scope they are, that no one is responsible for. Take this away. What can the agent see? What can this agent do? How can I be sure of what it actually did? And then who's going to own the consequences? Thank you very much for your attention, and find me if you've got any questions.